Ravi had never been much for impulse purchases. He preferred his decisions like his photographs, deliberate, patient, taken after the light and the subject had agreed on the same moment. Still, there was something about that dusty lighting on the second-hand marketplace that made him click. The seller had posted a single photo of the body, the camera itself, on a scarred wooden table. The paint chipped like an old city map. The description read 5 words: old model, perfect condition, take care of her. He messaged, received a short reply, and then a time. The meetup was at a cafe behind the station, where the air forever smelled of burnt coffee and petrol. The seller was a woman who wore a scarf like a question mark. Her eyes were small, quick. She did not make small talk.
Cash?
She asked. Of course, he handed her the notes. She slid him the camera like it was wrapped in something fragile, beyond the glass and metal, as if the thing itself might be hiding a heart. She had a small bandage on the inside of her wrist, and when she noticed him looking, she laughed without warmth.
Take care of her.
She said again. She remembers. He had smiled, the kind of smile he used for clients who expect flattering portrait. He said what one said in the transactions. Thanks, great to meet you. She turned on her heel and left. He watched her go, watched the scarf settle around her neck like a small shroud, and for the first time since the audition, he felt a thin thread of unease he could not name. The camera was a workhouse, slightly older body, heavy weight in a hand, the glass as clean as a promise. He loaded it with cheap SD card he had kept for emergencies, took a picture of the cafe's exposed bulb, and felt that familiar click of satisfaction. On the way home, he framed the city through the car window, found angles he liked, reflections in puddles, people moving like hurried brush strokes. The world compiled. He catalogued them, uploaded the decent ones to his portfolio, and shelved the camera on a small stand in his studio. It was 3 days before he noticed the photos. At first, he thought it was a mistake, a misclick on the card reader. When he inserted the SD card into his laptop, the thumbnail gallery opened, and there they were, a stack of images numbered DSC 0001 to DSC 0999, each shot at 303. Midnight meanings and numerology nagged at the edge of his clever brain. He told himself it was just a quirk, some camera glitch. He scrawled. Empty hallways, old doorways, the same corridor frame repeated, as if someone had practiced the same angle at length. The timestamp said 3:03 a.m. for each. It is impossible, he thought, to be in so many places at once. He deleted them. His finger hovered. He sent them to a friend in the lab, Vikram, who would say if the card had been forged or formatted oddly. Vikram texted back a thumbs up, then, breathless, "Who's your dealer?" That night he slept the kind of sleep of someone who had earned the rest. He woke coughing at 3 a.m., not because of alarm, but because of something like instinct. The room smelled of bleach. His phone lay face down. He reached over and grabbed for it, then froze. There was a new photo in his inbox. It was of him, asleep, curled one legged like a photograph of a sleeping animal. The shot was taken from a height he did not recognize. The angle was impossible. The lens looked down into him, catching the wan face of a man who did not feel like his reflection. For a long while he did nothing. He told himself stories. The camera's internal clock was wrong. Someone had sent him an old file. He opened the file and checked the metadata. Time 3:03. Location home. The location tag made him laugh at first, a nervous exhale, because metadata could be wrong. It confounded him more than it frightened him. He is a photographer. He had rehearsed fear through a lens before, but the photograph had a quality he could not reason away. The angle was too intimate to be an accident. Someone had been above him when the picture was taken, or more precisely, someone had been watching him. He set up his own camera, a cheap webcam, facing the doorway at eye level. He left his phone on the bed, the screen dark. He made tea, then curled on the sofa with a book that he did not intend to read. He told himself he was being ridiculous. The city hummed in the ways that cities do when people forget one another, focus on their own small fires. At 3:03 a.m., the webcam clipped. The recording saved. When he fast forwarded through the footage, the hair on his forearm pricked. A moment of a moment at the edge of the frame. A shadow like a hand passing near the ceiling. Not quite there, and yet not fully absent. He rewound, rewatched, and pressed the image with his thumb, as though he might flatten the presence out. The sound on the recording was nothing more than the kettle, the radiator, his breathing. There was no football, no breath. The shadow moved out of the physics of occupants. He stopped the video and felt suddenly sick. Ravi called Vikram at 8, voice steady enough. They met at a roadside tea stall, the kind which cracked enamel mugs and a radio that always played the same old songs. Vikram took the SD card in gloved hands, checked file consistency, and hummed in a way a person hums when the facts want to be neat and are not. These are older images, he finally said. Maybe an old shoot, but the metadata's legit. Look. He brought up the hex viewer and scrolled through. They were secondary frames embedded, invisible in ordinary viewers. A second layer. Steganography, he said. Hidden frames inside each JPEG, masked like secret compartments. Why would anyone do that? Ravi asked. To hide things. To slip something under the roof of a file so casual users can't spot it. Vikram rubbed his thumb over his temple. What emerged was another set of images the original viewer had not shown. Frames that were not of doorways and hallways, but of a bedroom, a bed, a pale man. The camera in the frame was at a different height from the images in the SD card. Higher, suggested a vantage from the ceiling, or perhaps a mounted spot. In the corner of every hidden frame stood a figure, the same woman, pale, long hair stringing around her face, eyes set flat as photographs. Her dress looked like an old photograph hung in a corridor of time. She was looking at him, not smiling, not moving. Vikram went quiet. Whoever did this layered a constant narrative across the individual images. He said, it's like a secret film. You get the ordinary file and behind it, recordings of the same room. Ravi felt a dull iron taste in his mouth. Why of me? He murmured. Vikram shrugged. Maybe it's not you. Maybe they found someone who slept like you. He left with the card clacking in his pocket, and after a long night in which he imagined the woman's face at the corners of his ceilings, he began to see signs that someone had been inside his home. A curtain slightly more open than he remembered. A dust mark on the bookshelf that hinted someone else lay on that surface last night. A smudge on the inside of window the size of a palm. The rational part of his mind lined up reasons. Maybe a delivery. Maybe he had misremembered. Maybe someone had come in while he was out. A neighbor checking on the plant. Or a builder. Distressed. He took more photographs and uploaded them to his portfolio. On mornings, his inbox hosted a dozen comments, like from his colleagues. But every night, always at 3:03 a.m., there was a new photo waiting in his backup folder. They were never of the city anymore. They were of him. He involved the police with something close to embarrassment. He imagined their patience with small town crimes, their polite foreigners. They had sent a single officer, a man named Desai, who smelled faintly of aftershave and duty. Desai checked doors, found no sign of forced entry, and listened to Ravi with half-trained ear. He took the camera as evidence, bagged it, noted the time and strange payment the seller had accepted. He recalled checking her wrist and promised to investigate. The day police took the camera, Ravi felt oddly naked. When the apartment was quiet, he could not sleep. He left a chair in the middle of the room, set a glass of water on the coffee table, and pored over the photos until dawn. When he blinked, the woman's face in the hidden frame seemed to shift silver by silver, as if some scratch in the emulsion were changing the angle of her blink. Sometimes she was turned slightly to the left, sometimes her hair felt differently. He told himself that pixels cannot move on their own, that artifacts may be misleading. He drank more coffee. He called in a favor, an old professor of photography who now freelanced as an archivist, and asked if she could look at the files. Professor Sangeeta came that afternoon, posted straight like someone who had learned to carry the grave of wrongdoings of others in her shoulders with quiet. She adjusted her glasses, tapped at the keyboard like someone tuning a piano. She examined the exact frames and pursed her lips. These are not the same woman every time, she said. They look similar, same dress, same hair, but each face is hair's breadth different, as if they were frames of a moving subject. Someone recorded these, Ravi said. Someone watched me sleep and then hid it inside old pictures. Or someone wanted you to watch them watching you, Sangeet answered. The hidden frames are little cameras of their own. They tell a story on repeat. She looked up then, and her eyes landed on a small bruise on Ravi's forearm. He had gotten by bumping his bike. It was a small human thing. Do you have any enemies, Ravi? People who hate your photography? He laughed, which felt like tossing a stone into a real problem. No, I shoot streets, weddings. The only thing I do is point a lens at someone and sell them prints. Then why would someone obsess? Training, access, a plan. Sangeeta paused. Why not ask your neighbors? Someone could have a line of sight from a maintenance ladder or an old service balcony. He knocked on doors. Mr. Rao from 4B, retired, lives with two cats, shrugged and said the building's stairwell was full of pigeons and that he never went up there at night. A woman named Meera in 5C, who taught piano, watched him like a girl watching rain. She admitted seeing a figure once, months ago, a shadow in the courtyard at 3 in the morning who disappeared like breath. When the officers returned days later, they were more serious. They had traced the camera serial number to the pawn shop 3 towns away, and then further back to an estate sale the seller's name matched. The seller, they learned, had been listed as Anjali Mehra in a record dated 2 years ago. Anjali Mehra had died in a small flat, not 2 kilometers away from Ravi's. The case had been quiet, a stately obituary that mentioned her love of composition and her old habit of collecting old cameras. Friends recalled that she had been particular about the way someone stands by a window, her neighbor, who would not give his name. Anjali would sit all night taking pictures of nothing and then laugh like someone who knows she's found a secret. Why sell the camera? Ravi asked the officer. Estate, I support. Desai said. No, Ken, things get liquidated. But the linger remained. Anjali had told him to take care. She had said she remembers. The words looped in his head like a phonograph with a stuck record. The photos continued. At night, the images were frail with distance, a corner of a blanket, a breath of light on the cheek, but they accelerated. A week after the police took the camera, his backup folder held a sequence of shots, each separated by only a second. A hand reaching above the bed, fingers curved like a question, a hidden white sleeve, a profile blurred with movement, an immobile face with darkness. The resolution in each frame was higher than the host images. It felt obscene, as though someone had decided to give the secret file with more detail than the ordinary world deserved. He tried cameras everywhere. He bought new, sealed set, wired recording devices, set up motion sensors and mirrors. He replaced locks. He slept with his phone in a safe. The photos still came at 3:03 without fail. Once, when he tried to catch the intruder on the live feed, the camera's recording light blinked and then went out. He trawled the footage for artifacts, for the sound of movement, for any tell. The dams of rationality cracked into panic. He began to catalog himself in photographs, pictures of his feet, the inside of his shoes, in an attempt to preempt the next invasion. Vikram suggested an experiment. If the camera in simple tech, it needs line of sight. Put up a ladder outside your window. Find out where someone could stand. Ravi bought a thin aluminium ladder, propped it against the brickwork below his balcony, and climbed until the city was a lattice of lights under his palms. The climb was stupid and dangerous. His hands were raw by the time he reached the ledge and leaned over to look at his own apartment like a man spying on the past. Nothing. The apartment's window, 2 floors up, was simply glass. There was no hidden ledge, no shuttered small box. The building's architecture did not support a watcher. He took pictures from the ladder, hailed the roof, but the rooftop's maintenance hatch was locked and bare. The roof was a small rectangle of tar and an old antenna that bent when wind hit it. At night, he began sleeping less. He took to the streets with his camera half open, shooting bad weather and better strangers. He did not trust his own bed. Yet, camera persisted, arriving like a tide. A new picture always sat in the same folder at 3:03. Images that pushed closer each night. A hand that neared and then retracted. An object that cast a shadow he could not name. One evening, an older woman from the building, Mrs. Banerjee, sought him out. He was stooped, a permanent handkerchief in her bag, eyes like a shop window that kept people's reflections. Are you the boy with the camera? She said. Yes, you should be careful, she told him, in the way old people give advices that smells like memory. Homes keep secrets, she said. They collect them like dust. You brought something in. What did I bring? He asked. She did not answer directly. Instead, she described a woman who used to sit by the courtyard in the rain and take photos of alley tiles. She loved the way water made lines. She would sit and wait for someone to pass, like someone waiting to see if the world would stop for them. She paused. They never found her in time. Their words were small and clinical, a news report, yet they lost. If Anjali had died there, if she had loved waiting for images that failed her, would she not have left traces of that vigil behind? Would someone not carry on what she left like a ritual? Ravi's friend began to tiptoe. Weddings were cancelled, shoots were delayed. He noticed a change in how people looked at him. Pity, that slid into something with contempt. He tried to be professional, but he found himself apologizing for the smallest things. The timbre of his voice, the jitter in his hand when he framed a shot. The city felt rearranged. He judged it with alarm. He watched people in cafes like an ecologist watch birds that have started behaving strangely. He pasted his own eye on his own walls in photographs like warnings. One night, in a fit of courageous foolness, he decided to go on Anjali's old fat, the estate agent whom Vikram badgered with calls and questions. Finally gave him access to the room under the theory that the flat was empty and had no law forbade curiosity. The lift smelled of old painting. The corridor hummed. The key turned in a lock that had been used rarely. Dust rose from the floor like the end of a story. The apartment was of small things: a single chair by the window, a bookshelf holding old magazines, a table with chipped cup. Photos were pinned to a string across the living room, worn like teeth, slices of corners, composition of alleys, stark images of a face he did not know that observed buildings. One wall had a grid of Polaroids, showing him the same room from different perspectives. At the center, pinned with tenderness, was a portrait of a woman who might have been Anjali. In the image, she sat like a middle note, hair in a loose knot, eyes fixed on the camera lens as if she were posing for a mirror. The photograph had a label beneath: She waits. On the table lay a small leather note, pages soft with handling. Inside, notes in neat, small hand mapped: 303, watch 303, call for wind. An entry that simply read, He is close. Another note had an address: Rudy, a name crossed out, with a number that matched an old door code. There was a line, underlined twice, that said, Make sure he sleeps through. Ravi left the flat with the notebook stuffed in his bag. The estate agent watched him go, expression polite and thin. Outside, he stood on the pavement and read until the ink blurred. Anjali had documented people, not as subjects in art, but as elements in a ritual to capture something else. Sleep, maybe, or a private stillness. The entries implied she had been waiting for someone to arrive at 303 for months. There were names, there was a design. The date in the margin was 2 years prior. He took the books to Vikram Forensics. The man looked at handwriting, compared the photos, and then said something quietly. This isn't just obsession. Someone had been practicing. Someone watched and took notes. The pace of the images increased after that. Hidden frames began to show sequences. Not only single photos, the movement of blankets, a hand creeping across the sheets, the shadow of a face leaning near the pillow, the camera's conspiracy with sleep pressed at the edge of his sanity. He began to shower at night on purpose, to use up time, to tire his body into uselessness. He lectured himself on rationality. He told himself to consider the simplest answers: surveillance, a stalker, a prank. But he could not find the prankster. He set a trap. He installed a tiny motion sensor that would send a ping to his phone if anything larger than a mouse crossed the threshold. He left the apartment from the system armed and went to a cafe where the radio was predictable and the latte foam always the same. He drank slowly and stared out at the rain. At a minute past 3, the system went off. He froze, heart leaping like small animal, then ran back. The alert was clearly in the log. Moment detected in bedroom at 3:03 a.m. He picked up his phone and dialed the police with the kind of exactitude of someone calling on a machine to do a human thing. Officer Desai arrived. Sure now, a man whose face had rotated to a more professional angle since the first visit. Our team searched. They found nothing in the apartment besides the pillows disturbed from severed sleep. There were no camera holes in the ceiling, no wires snaked through vents, no telescopes on adjacent roofs. Nothing. When they asked to check buildings' maintenance closets, a worker grudgingly opened the room on the roof, and the open stairs and then shut it again. It was empty save for a cupboard and unused bulbs of fire extinguisher and a dusty fire extinguisher. The officer said they would follow up, that they would look at the CCTV footage from the street, from the building entrance. They promised the kind of things men promise when they mean to be helpful and have limited tools. They found a clip from the neighbor night before. They found a clip from the night before. At 3:02, the camera showed the street empty of people. At 3:03, a figure crossed the frame at a far edge, vanished into the alley. The resolution was poor. The figure moved with an odd angle, like someone bending forward to remain out of the view. They blew the image up, enhanced contrast, and the face leaned into something that you could not quite call human. A pulled mask or face under a hood that concealed more than it revealed. The trace vanished. Despondence lodged in him. Then, like a small stone, he stopped answering calls. He began to sleep sitting with clothes on, one eye awake and the other closed, as if in a state of measurement. He considered selling the flat. He thought about leaving the city, but the apartment had been his for 5 years. The thought of packing felt like erasing himself. On a night thick with rain and low roar of the city, he went back through the notebook and found a loose page folded within. It was a short note in a different hand. If you read this, she has moved on. Make sure he stays sleeping. Under it, a name. Not Anjali's, a woman's name, Nisha. Ravi tried to trace Nisha. The name led to a dead end. Calls got intercepted with polite automated messages. He called the number anyway, heard a voice he could not place, and then nothing. He thought of the woman at the stall who said, "Homes keep secrets," and how she might have meant precisely this: things living in the furniture, migrating through objects, leaving traces not easily swept. The final week was a blur of small guards and large phrase. He kept camera on his chest like a talesman and recorded himself for evidence. And he searched for ways to blow the secret open. He installed a low-light camera on a tripod that ran on battery and stored footage to an encrypted drive. He booby-trapped the room with motion detectors and a tiny bell on the doorknob. He convinced a neighbor to leave her cat in his care to return for a favor. He slept with lights on and with shoes on because it felt like something to do. At 2:50 a.m., the neighborhood was silent. He set the camera, pressed record in a nervous ritual, and lay down as the minutes trickled and the ceiling watch of past images arranged themselves like a thread. At 3:01, he thought of threads, Anjali's notes, the seller's badge, the pawn shop, the phone calls. He told himself he would look the woman in the face if she came. He was tired in a way that made nerves visible at the edge. At 3:03, his motion detector did not ping. He lay still, listening to the city. The clock on his phone clicked 3:03, then 3:04. For first time in weeks, nothing happened. Relief exhaled and left him weak. He closed his eyes. He did not hear the footfall. He did not see the hand. In the morning, his neighbor found the front door slightly ajar and called the police. Officer Desai arrived with two others, and together they found out the apartment in a hush that felt like a held breath. The tripod stood where he had left it, the cameras pointing to the bed. The battery pack was clipped. The memory card was present. His phone was in his light stand. His shoes were by the door. His wallet lay under the coffee table. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no sound of an exit. A single thing perturbed the officers. The camera's playback showed an empty bed until in the last frames, a thin, pale hand reached from the dark and pressed against the lens. The hand left a smear, as if someone had touched a window from inside. Weeks later, they found his notebook in a charity box of donated goods. Pages spread like the sterile wings of a moth. The police labeled the case missing person under investigation. Friends raised money, posted notices, and scrolled through his city photos for any secret. People online commented calling each other paranoid, each other fools. On a rainy morning, 2 months after Ravi vanished, a courier found a parcel outside the cafe where he had bought the camera. Inside, wrapped in a rough paper, was an old DSLR stabbed in a frayed case. Attached was a note in the handwriting he might have recognized if he had seen it. Take care of her, she remembers. There were photos inside the SD card, thousands of them, not even organized into neat folders, but a flood of images, all taken at 3:03. They showed empty hallways, wet pavement, a woman standing under a streetlight, a hand on a glass pane, a silhouette in a doorway, and between them, the most uncomfortable frames, a man asleep in an armchair, his face turned towards the window, a hand touching his shoulder, a reflection that looked like him but older by a decade, smiling. People argued about what to do with these images. Some said the parcel was a prank, others said it was the work of an obsessive archivist. The police frowned at the fingerprints and found nothing. Vogues of conspiracy slid across forums. A few people posted the new the a few pis- a few people posted the more newsworthy frames, and they went viral among a small crowd, voracious crowd. A photographer who vanished. Camera comes back. Comments poured in, mixing pity with forbid fascination. The internet's appetite forever incomplete. Months later, in a studio across town, an anonymous art gallery put on a show of found photographs. They hung the prints in rows. A mosaic of waiting. People whispered about how some photos seemed to look back at viewers who were not in that room. The curator would tell anyone who asked the camera had been passed along like a humor, and that, in the end, the most disturbing thing was how ordinary the images were. Just a hand, a street, a moment of sleep. Ravi's mother moved out of her flat and kept both of his childhood portraits and a Polaroid of him at the beach between the pages of a photo album. She pressed the photos with fingers that trembled and said little. The police went cold. Sometimes at night, people said they saw a light on his old photo studio. A lamp left burning. A shutter clicked. The small sound of a camera taking another photograph. In the corner of the internet, someone who called themselves She Watches posted a single line of beneath a grainy image of a window. She remembers. No one could say for certain what happened to Ravi. Some argued the simplest explanation. A jealous stalk, a jealous stalker, a deranged collector, and left it at that. Others could not accept that the whole people disappear without a spectacle. The photographers suggested intent and a ritualistic patience that made them worse than random crime. The hand in the last footage, the woman at the corner of the frames, the note from the seller, threads the window could not unravel. Each pull made the other more tangled. Sometimes late at night, I looked at the old gallery prints and thought of how the camera must feel. Held, passed, opened, closed. Tools have no agency. They are instruments, but objects can store habit. A camera used to watch became a camera that watches by practice, by repeated action. Habit obsesses into pattern. Someone who once sat outside a window waiting for sleep shapes the world to allow for repeating. And once the patterns exist, others may learn it, follow it. The last image anyone ever agreed upon was simple, a blurred shape in the window, like a hand pressed against glass from the inside. The fingers long as if wanting entry. It is the kind of image the mind tries to correct. Maybe it is a reflection, maybe it is a trick of the light. But if you keep looking long enough, your eyes begin to respect what they have seen. If you keep seeing it, it becomes possible that some faces learn to wait for cameras, the way birds learn the light, expecting someone to look and finding someone who does. Ravi's camera sat in a box, and the cameras that came after making images at 3:03. The city continued. People continued to sleep. If you ever walk past a second-hand shop with a camera in the window and a note tied to its strap, maybe you will read it. Maybe it will tell you to take care. Maybe you'll laugh and move on. Or maybe you'll feel very slightly the sense that certain objects are not neutral, that they keep the justice of the people who use them most, that patience becomes a device, that watching can teach someone how to wait for a place where sleep makes a person vulnerable enough to be documented. I don't know which is worse, that someone taught themselves the habit of watching, or that the habit, like a disease, can live on in mental and light. The images remain and they keep their patient promises. They remember.